Welcome to everybody who has joined this What Makes or Breaks a Successful Digital Transformation Strategy webinar, and thank you all for doing so. Let me first introduce myself. My name is Lavina Advani, and I'm the Digital Marketing Manager here at Imperial's Executive Education Division. I'm joined by Daniel Rowles, Digital Marketing Lecturer for the MSc in Strategic Marketing at Imperial College Business School. In the course of the next 30 to 40 minutes, Daniel will take you through the digital capability factors that can make or break a digital transformation. You will gain insight into 10 key areas of digital transformation and get exclusive access into research carried out for his book, Digital Culture. Daniel is bringing in practical insight from his role by supporting people on the ground practicing it. Feel free to ask any questions throughout the webinar using the questions box. Daniel will try and answer all of them at the end of the webinar. I'm now going to hand over to Daniel, who will introduce himself.
Hi everybody and welcome to the webinar. Thank you very much for that introduction. I will try and answer questions at the end, but if you want to ask any questions during the presentation, please just type them into the chat or the questions box and I'll try and keep an eye and answer those as we go through things. Just to start by explaining who I am. So I'm Daniel Rowles. I am a lecturer at Imperial College on the MSc program and I lead the exec education program for digital transformation. I'm CEO of a company called Target Internet, and we work with lots of organizations helping them go through their digital transformation process, and I'll talk about some of those in a moment. I'm also a trainer for lots of organizations like Google, and I've written a few books on the topic, which I promise not to mention at all today, apart from the digital transformation one, where we've got some exclusive research that I'm going to share with you today. If you want to say anything nice or nasty during the presentation, feel free to do so. You can obviously ask me a question via the chat box, but you can also go onto Twitter or to Instagram, as you can see there, and feel free to connect up on LinkedIn as well. The kind of organizations that we work with, you can see on the screen there. So lots of brands that you'll be familiar with. And actually, as part of the research that we did for the Digital Culture book, I'm going to introduce some of those companies in a bit more detail and talk about some of the challenges and opportunities that they saw during the digital transformation process. And I'll signpost some resources that will hopefully be useful as we go through this as well. We are recording the session as well, so we'll try and make that available afterwards as well. And if you want to follow up with any questions afterwards, I'll make sure that you've got my contact details as well. So some of the research that I'm going to be talking about today was taken from this book, Building Digital Culture. This went on to win the Chartered Management Institute Book of the Year based on the model that I'm going to introduce to you now. So I'm not trying to sell you a book. I'm just trying to persuade you that the information that we're going to go through is hopefully very useful and very relevant. And as you can see, we work with a whole variety of different brands and organizations that were going through a digital transformation. And we looked at why they were successful and try to understand the challenges that they were facing. So I'm going to go through some of that information now. Now, one of the key things that is really important we define from the outset is what we're actually talking about when we talk about digital transformation. And I'm going to come to this quote in a moment. This is from Caitlin at Deloitte, who's their head of digital. But essentially what we're really saying is, where are we now as an organization? And where do we need to be as an organization to be able to implement and use all this digital stuff that's happening around us? But one of the key starting points is really understanding what we mean by the word digital. And you can see here the quote from Caitlin that says one of the first things that she did was interview a lot of the partners at Deloitte, and across them there was a huge amount of experience. And really what was interesting is she asked them, what's your interpretation of digital? And pretty much everyone gave a different answer. And I think that's a really important starting point, is who's responsible for this and where does the responsibility organization lie? And it's across the organization. This isn't an IT thing, this isn't a marketing thing, this isn't an HR thing. It's all of those things. It affects pretty much every aspect of the business, from customer service through to our technology, through to how we do our marketing, through to how we get to our customers, and so on. So one of the key things is having buy-in across the organization, and we're going to talk about that in just a second. But really getting to the bottom of what we mean for this is actually the business environment has changed. And if we want our organizations to survive this change and to thrive in continuing change, we need to address the challenges that we're going to face. Now, as part of writing this book and in part of my day-to-day practice, we work with lots of organizations, and we've kind of worked out there are 10 key areas that are really helping or hindering people from being successful in this digital transformation process. So I want to take you through those 10 key principles. I'll introduce them now, then I'll go to them in detail over the next 30 minutes or so, and then I'll give you some pointers in terms of next steps. So essentially, we split the 10 factors into 3 areas: essentials, readiness, and performance. And these are the things that give us our digital capability. Now, the key thing to understand is that all of these things are fixable. And that is the digital transformation process, that we look at where we are with each of these areas and we can fix them and optimize them, but don't be downhearted or disheartened by the fact that actually you might not be doing great in all of these areas at the moment. So leadership buy-in. Do we have true leadership buy-in across the organization, not just lip service? Do they understand what this digital stuff is? And I'll go through these in more detail in a moment. Team ability. Do we have the skills across the organization? Market readiness. Actually, is my target audience and market adopting this digital stuff? Resources. Do I have the time, money, and people? Strategy. Is there a digital strategy? Is that aligned with the broader business strategy? You very often find that you have a marketing strategy and a digital marketing strategy, and actually those two things should be one and the same. Governance. Now, it's not that more governance is necessarily good, but we do need the basic principles and processes in place. Infrastructure is essentially IT and systems, a particularly thorny problem that we're going to talk about. Measurement is, am I measuring the right things? But then really importantly, in performance, can I connect that to my financial performance? So if you tweet more, for example, will you make more money? Can you prove that? The case is often no. And then finally, innovation. Is there a culture of test and learn? So these 10 factors that we're going to go into in detail are the 10 things that will make you succeed or fail when you're trying to go through a digital transformation process. And you'll kind of notice that a lot of them aren't particularly digital, really. And I think that's very important to understand, that this is a broad issue that is actually impacting many, many areas of the business. So let's get into these 10 areas in detail and really look at some of the challenges, but also some of the solutions. Now, what you can also do if you want to, as we're going through this, is kind of play along at home. So what that means is that we very often run this 10-factor framework in training courses and in workshops, and when we first go in and kick off a digital transformation process. And what I'll challenge you to do is, as we're going through this, is to give yourself a score out of 10 for each of the 10 headings. So as I go through each of the points, write down a score out of 10. Pretty arbitrary, but just kind of give yourself a bit of a judgment. And then at the end of that, add those scores up out of 10, and you should end up with a number out of 100. That will give you a kind of rough feeling of where you are with these things. But just to put it in context, the average organization scores themselves around 56. That goes up to about 65, depending on the type of organization. It tends to be lower in things where we have more risk adversity and more legacy systems. So if we were talking about financial services, for example, you might see lower scores. The highest score I've ever seen an organization judge itself was 98 out of 100. Which sounds ridiculously high, but it was a very, very well-known e-commerce website that you all know very well. So you can kind of judge that for yourselves. But don't be disheartened if you get low scores. This is all fixable, but you'll understand this in a moment. So go through, give yourself a score out of 10 for each point, add it up at the end, and see how you compare to the average score. So let's start off with leadership buy-in. Now, this is the single most important point, because if you have leadership buy-in, everything else is doable. If you don't have leadership buy-in, it can make some of the other things very difficult. And one of the common challenges that we see and the common problems in digital transformation is that if you don't have leadership buy-in, you can't get the resources to implement the IT and technology changes that are needed to prove return on investment. If you can't prove return on investment, you can't get leadership buy-in, which is a bit of a chicken and egg situation. But actually, what we would then suggest is that you can prove your return on investment in small areas. And I'll come to that later on. So how do you get leadership buy-in? Well, you might be lucky and it might be there already and they might completely believe, or you may be the leadership and completely believe in this. But if you haven't got that, how do you do it? Well, it says here, scare leadership. That doesn't sound like a great idea. But essentially what we're doing here is persuading them of the risk that the business environment is changing. And if we don't keep up to date with that, there is a huge business risk. Very often, if we find the board is really not wanting to change, we'll bring an external speaker in and we'll just talk to them about the huge risks if we don't keep up to date with this. It may be the leadership don't fully understand this. The most senior people in the organization are, for example, the least likely to be using social media actively. Now, that doesn't mean they're not using it, but statistically, they're the least likely. So actually, it might just be the fact that we need to educate them on how the digital environment is changing, how our customers are actually buying differently, and give them the confidence to get behind this. It might actually be that you make some of the senior team the figureheads for this program. And they might be honest, say, I don't fully understand some of the technology implications of this, but actually we know the business environment has changed and we need to get behind this. Once you have that leadership buy-in, it means that everyone else can align. It means that essentially you've got an opportunity to drive this forward, and it means hopefully you can get the resources where are needed in some of the key points that we'll come to first of all. But if you get high scores everywhere but low in leadership buy-in, it can still be problematic. But if you've got low scores everywhere but you score highly here, you've got an opportunity to fix it. So team ability. This is an ongoing issue across all organizations. And what we're really talking about is having the appropriate skills. There is a digital skills crisis. My organization, Target Internet, in partnership with the Chartered Institute of Marketing, published the Digital Skills Benchmark in 2018. And that basically sample surveyed 5,000 people and looked at their digital skills. And it actually tested their skills. It didn't ask their opinions, but actually tested out where their skills were. And I'll get a link distributed afterwards. But if you search Digital Skills Benchmark, you'll find it. And essentially what we found is there is a huge skills gap around a huge range of areas, but including marketing, IT, comms, and so on in terms of digital technologies. So we need to benchmark where our skills are now. But a lack of these skills is actually holding back a lot of transformation and ongoing adoption to different technologies. So it means we need the appropriate skills provision in place, whether that is training face-to-face or online, events, providing online resources. But what's really essential is that we provide a culture of ongoing learning. Because just because you give someone access to a library of online learning doesn't mean they're necessarily going to use it. And actually giving people responsibility for their own ongoing learning, making it part of their assessment criteria and so on becomes essential. And realizing that different people learn in different ways. And that face-to-face training is great, but also looking at the opportunities of things like videos, podcasts, e-learning, and so on, so people can learn in different formats and in different situations. So, for example, when they're commuting, podcasts have grown phenomenally in 2019 and grew a lot in the previous year as well. So, do we have that culture of ongoing learning, and how are we providing the resources to allow our target audience to learn? But have we benchmarked ourselves? Do we actually understand where the skills gaps are? Now, market readiness is a challenging one, because market readiness is really saying, have we analysed our audience and have they adopted these technologies? So are they using mobile devices? The answer is probably yes. Have they adopted social media? Now, this can vary across an organisation as well. If we take an organisation like a large retailer or a grocery provider, for example, you would expect that most of those people that use the services of that company are using mobile and social media, and they probably are. But the reality is a percentage of them, around 8% in the UK, won't own a smartphone because, one, either income levels or because the demographics and age. So actually it can be a different picture across a single audience. So we need to break our audience down into personas, and we need to understand what technologies they're using and how that really impacts how they're researching and buying our products or services, and how we can go about interacting with them differently. But this continues to change as well. So we've seen changes in adoption of social media across the world. But for example, in the UK, the use of Facebook has declined in terms of levels of engagement, huge growth in areas like Instagram. What does that mean to our business? If we're B2B, what do these more consumer-facing channels mean? How are people using LinkedIn and Twitter and so on? So just to give you an example, we said that I teach on the MSc program at Imperial College. We've got about 200 students on the Strategic Marketing Masters program, most of whom are 21 years old. We asked them about 2 years ago, how many of them are using Twitter? These are marketing students, and as you expect, about 97% of them are using Twitter. We asked the same thing in this academic year, 200 students, how many of you are using Twitter? And 4 of them put their hands up. They don't know what Twitter's for, they don't know why they'd use it, and it's just not a channel they're aware of. So not only do we need to understand different demographics, different areas of our market, but also understand how that's changing over time as well, and really mapping out our potential audiences. We obviously need the resources. Now that's about time, money, and people, but we're never going to have enough time, money, and people, generally speaking, or the ideal amount. So a lot of it is about efficiency and actually really understanding the processes and the systems we need to work in an efficient way. It's about really integrating our different functions. That may be our marketing and sales. That could well be IT and marketing working together as well. And if we're going to justify those resources, we need to be able to prove our return on investment of our activity. But again, this is one of the challenges of digital transformation, in that actually we need the management buy-in in order to get the IT and systems that allow us to prove that return on investment in the first place. So I'll come back to that point in a moment as well. And this isn't necessarily just having more and more resources, but it's really about understanding and being as efficient as possible so that we can use what we've got effectively and not being held back by things like IT and systems and so on. Now, strategy is hugely important, but just to put it in perspective, I do the CIM Digital Summit every year, and I've spoken at the CMI Digital Summit for the last 3 years as well. And at both of these, the Chartered Institute of Marketing, the Chartered Management Institute, we've asked the audiences, are you going to do more digital this year? And everybody says, yeah, more digital. And then we ask people, do you have a digital strategy, whether that's a marketing strategy or a management strategy or an IT strategy? And 40% of people every year say, no, no strategy. So there's a lot of activity going on, but actually it's not necessarily in a particularly planned way. So our digital strategy should be part of our business strategy, our IT strategy, our marketing strategy. They shouldn't be separate things, but essentially we need to be very aware of what impact it's having and an iterative approach to our strategy. How is technology changing or potentially changing our strategy? And actually, how do we change and adjust and improve things on an ongoing basis? So that instead of just having annual reviews and planning an annual strategy, we are revisiting things, because actually in a year, so much is going to change that actually that strategy is probably out of date. So looking at the business cycles that we work in and realizing that actually if they're too long, we're probably going to be out of date by the time we get there. So looking at the processes that we have. Now that brings us on to governance, because governance is very about our working processes. And it doesn't actually mean that we have to have more processes, but it means that we need to work in efficient ways. So with things like our IT, who signs these things off? With our marketing, who signs things off? HR, how quickly and so on are we signing these processes off? Who works together? How do teams integrate? Do we work using an agile methodology? So agile is something that we've used in tech development for a long time. The idea that we have cross-disciplinary teams and we work in sprints in these short cycles of work. But actually that's being adopted across all different areas of organizations, comms teams, marketing teams, IT teams, which have already been doing this for a while, working in this agile way. And what it's really trying to do is meaning, can we get things to market quickly? Whether that is a product, a service, a piece of content, a piece of communications, a new piece of IT functionality. And essentially what we're trying to do is use a lot of this process to build a single customer view. And we'll talk about technology in a moment. But what I really want to do is understand who my target audience is, how they've interacted with me, how they've actually gone through and purchased my products or services previously, maybe what they've said in social media, how they've interacted with my call center. And I want to take all of that, have it in one place, and be able to make smart decisions and make quick decisions as well. But that's not just about IT, that's all about process as well. So we need to have a clear view on where we are with these processes. Who's responsible for monitoring social media? What happens when something goes wrong on social media? Who's responsible for monitoring the IT and the systems? And so on, so that we can really make sure that we have the appropriate processes in place so we can work efficiently, but we can also work in a way where we're tracking things. Now, infrastructure is our IT and systems. And really, we want to join things up. So, for example, does our customer relationship management system join up to our email service provider? And in turn, does that line up with our web analytics and so on? Now, the larger the organization, the more problematic that this can potentially be. And the more legacy systems that we have, the more challenges we're going to face with this. If I'm a startup, it's relatively easy. I can go off and get a free content management system like WordPress. I could plug that into my web analytics. I could use something like Salesforce on a single user license, plug all these things in together very cheaply, very cost effectively. But actually, if I've got lots of legacy systems, this IT and infrastructure challenge is really what stands in the way of me doing a lot of digital transformation. And actually, sometimes we need to commit large budgets in order to do these things. Now, increasingly, what this meant is people are moving to software as a service solutions that are constantly updated. And that's a really important point, because the idea of digital transformation is not that we're going to do this and then once we've done it, that's it, we're done, we've transformed and it's fantastic. It's moving towards a culture of ongoing change, and that things are going to continue to change. And therefore, we need infrastructure and IT solutions that are able to change on an ongoing basis as well. And not every 5 years, we need to start from scratch again. Now, organizations like Salesforce are gearing themselves up to help with this. So they will say, come to us and we'll give you all of these systems out of a box. And actually, it's nicely integrated and so on as well. But generally, it's not that easy because we're not starting from scratch. So we need a clear view on where we are now and the process that we're going to go through. And this is why digital transformations are generally multi-year projects. There was a survey done at the end of 2018 asking just around 2,000 organizations where they were in regard to digital transformation. And 68% of those organizations came out and said, we're about to start, or we are in the early stages of a digital transformation. When they were asked what was making the digital transformation take a long time, the key point that came out in 88% of cases was infrastructure and IT challenges. So these things do take time, but one of the key things we have to do is break this down, because one of the key failures that we found for the digital culture book is where things went completely wrong, is where people were trying to boil the ocean. They were trying to do everything at once. And actually, there was a huge breakdown because of that. And things had to be started from scratch again. So IT and systems are going to be a big challenge. And this is why we need buy-in from the appropriate areas of the organization. This also comes into areas like confidence in our data, the GDPR, the General Data Protection Regulations, and so on. Now, measurement is basically saying, do we know what we're measuring in digital and why? Now, that might be something like a comms or a marketing piece of data when we're looking at likes or engagement, or it could be something we're measuring in terms of the efficiency of our IT systems. But what we really need to know is, what are we measuring and why are we measuring it? Because too much, we're looking at vanity metrics still. We're looking at things like likes, we're looking at interactions. But actually, we need to ask ourselves, why are we measuring those things? And we need to measure the right things in order to be able to prove our return on investment. But the biggest challenge that we're generally seeing is making a connection between measurement and actually our business objectives. So this is a measurement framework. And this is used by a wide range of organizations to try and measure their digital comms and marketing activity in this particular case. But actually, at the heart of this, there are some IT solutions that we need. So I might be measuring things for my email activity. I might be measuring things for things that I'm doing in social media. I might be measuring things coming through from search. And really what I'm trying to define is a primary objective. What do I really want people to do online? And really, there are only three types of organization. There's one that's an e-commerce organization, which is relatively straightforward. My primary objective is an online sale, and my business objective is an online sale. So there's no really gap between those two things. The next type of organization is a lead generation business. And a lead generation business, their primary objective is generating leads online or phone calls. The actual business objective is sales. There's a bit more of a gap between those two things. The third type of business is a brand. And my primary objective is some sort of engagement, but my actual business objective may be you walking into a store or a dealership and interacting with me differently. And there's a larger gap there. But really what I need to know is how are my different sources of web traffic actually driving contribution towards my primary objective. Now, in order to get this, I need the right technology in place because I'm going to need some web analytics, I'm going to need channel analytics, and then I'm going to need something that tells me how are they actually contributing? Do they make up part of the journey that leads to people actually doing the thing that I want them to do? Now, this kind of framework might look a little complicated. The reality is it's fairly straightforward once you get it set up, but it needs the right systems in place. And then we can use something like Google Data Studio, a free tool for bringing all that data from different places into one place. Now, if you're interested in this area of things, I've got a step-by-step guide of how you actually go through setting up a dashboard like this and how you can use it on a day-by-day in practice. But essentially, this is part of the digital transformation process. I need to set up these measurement dashboards so that I can get the right stakeholders in the room to look at this dashboard and say, what do I think this is telling me? And therefore plan my activity on the basis of this dashboard, rather than what's happening in digital marketing, in comms, in HR, in many cases, where there's a lot of ad hoc activity. There's not really much logical kind of data behind that. So we'll continue working through the 10 points. Hopefully you've been marking yourself out of 10 as you get to each of these. And we're just on to the final two now, so you can go through and give yourself marks on those. So financial is really saying, okay, maybe I've created a measurement dashboard and I've gone through and I'm recording the right things and I'm understanding how things are contributing towards my business objectives. But really, can I make that connection between marketing activity and financial performance, or my comms activity, or what changes I've made in IT, or how we've changed our processes in HR and what that's meant to our actual financial performance? So we need to be able to join up those dots and then analyze things. Once we can do this, we're in a situation where we can prove the return on investment of a marketing change, an IT change, HR, or any other area of the business. But this is actually the hardest thing to do. If you're an e-commerce business, this is relatively straightforward. If you're a lead generation business, we can use customer relationship management systems to fix this problem. But actually, if I'm a brand and I want you to walk into my store, into my bank branch, if I want you to walk into my dealership, it's much harder to make those connections. But it is entirely possible. And then finally, is there a culture of trying new things? Can we iterate and actually work in a fast changing environment? And can we adapt to constant change? Now, generally, a culture of innovation requires the right reporting, the right data, and the right dashboards in place so that we can change something and see what impact it has quickly. So you can probably see that an awful lot of these different areas are interconnected. And that's one of the things that can create such big problems and big challenges within digital transformation. So having an effective digital transformation strategy is really the big challenge. And we'll talk about that a bit more in a moment. But while we're here at innovation, let's put this whole thing in context. What you can see in front of you now is a real prototype product. And this is an augmented reality contact lens. So this is a prototype product from Samsung, and essentially augmented reality is overlaying things on top of what I see. So the first iteration of this, which I saw a couple of years ago, went into your eye, you had a little transceiver, and it could overlay things on top of what you see. And essentially, it was a proof of concept. So all it could do was turn on and off a couple of dots. Unfortunately, also, it was rather thick as well. So once you had it in your eye, because it had some power in it, you couldn't actually close your eyes. Not the most practical thing in the world. This is the new iteration. This is as thin as normal contact lens. It can actually show much more complicated patterns over the top of what you're seeing. But unfortunately, in order to power it, you need a cable coming out of each eye, which is not particularly practical or pleasant. Now, this might sound ridiculous, but this is a proof of concept. And the presentation that was given when this was presented was quite entertaining. And the presenter came on and said, imagine that you have a pet cat. When you look at your cat, if you wish it to, it could look like a dog. Now, that sounds rather ridiculous, but there's definitely something quite interesting here in terms of the development of this technology. And actually, what does that mean to us? Now, we might look at this and think, well, this is kind of science fiction. But actually, if we look at our Apple iPhones and our Android phones from 10, 15 years ago, the change has been radical. And this level of change and the pace of change is only going to get faster. And with that environment and these constant innovations in technology, we actually need to make sure that we're not having our markets disrupted. And actually, the best way of doing that is really thinking about how we disrupt our own market, how we can change things and improve things on an ongoing basis. And really, digital transformation is at the heart of that process, making sure that this isn't just seen as an end destination. We're not going to go through and just say, we've now transformed, great, this is done, we can move on with kind of life as normal, but actually gearing up for an environment that constantly changes. And there's one thing we can guarantee is that the pace of change now will be the slowest it will ever be going forwards. So a digital transformation strategy is something that allows us to fix these 10 key factors and then put them in a position where they can change and we can iterate on an ongoing basis. So just to summarize things, now, if you've been going through and scoring yourself out of 10 on each of these points, go through and add those up now and see how you compare to that average score of 56 points. But this isn't about getting to a final destination. It is really about ongoing change. And we need to build the processes and the reporting capability to iterate. And that pace of change is only going to get faster. So we need to get this done so that the business environment hasn't moved so far away from where we are that actually it's insurmountable. So if you're interested in learning more about any of these topics, and actually if you need to build a digital transformation strategy, in June of this year, we have a program coming up that will actually help you build a digital transformation strategy. So it's a week-long, very interactive training workshop where you're going to come in and build your own digital transformation strategy and leave with a strategy that has been stress tested. So you will hear from lots of the advanced research work that's going on at Imperial College. You will hear from industry practitioners. You'll have the opportunity to build your digital strategy as you go through the week. And at the end of the week, there'll be a kind of Dragon's Den format where you're going to pitch your strategy and you'll have it pulled apart and critiqued by industry experts, and then have some time to improve things further as well. So you walk away with something very practical that you can take away and implement as well. You've got the link there if you want to find out more about that program. I'm leading this program and bringing in lots of industry experts and some of the academics from Imperial College to make it's a really world-class experience that you'll walk away with something that you can actually use as well. Now, if you've got any questions, please feel free to get in contact. It's d.rowles@imperial.ac.uk. If you are interested in the course, please get in contact with Jose, whose details you can see there. And if you've got any questions around the presentation, around getting access to the slides, the recordings, or anything like that as well, Lavina will be happy to help. And Lavina was the lady that introduced us right at the beginning as well. If you have got any questions now, please do feel free to put them into the chat functionality or into the questions functionality, and I will be sure to answer those, and I'll stay online to answer those for a while as well. If not, thank you very much for listening. Hope to speak to you again soon, and please do come on that program if you're interested.
Thank you. Thank you so much for your insight there, Daniel. If you want to get in touch with us for any further questions, or if we can be of any further assistance, our contact details are right up on your screens there. We're here to take any questions. We've got one question come through. Could I please get the email address of the person regarding getting the slides? That's myself, Ankit. We will be circulating the presentation as well as the slides that will come through to yourself. Any more questions? Please feel free to email them along. You've got the chat box there. Any questions? Then feel free to get them in. I've got a question here, Daniel. How long would it roughly take for me to implement a digital transformation strategy in my organization?
So that's a good question. It's also impossible to answer, but it's a very interesting one. We have seen organizations go through a digital transformation strategy in a matter of months. So if you have a relatively agile organization already, and the level of infrastructure needs changing isn't too large, but actually what we're normally talking about in large organizations is something that can take 12, 18 months as a kind of minimum, and that's absolutely fine. And the reality is that there are different stages of this that we'll need to go through. And actually there's no end destination, because what we'll do is get to the point of saying, okay, we've fixed the main building blocks, but now we need to build in the processes for constant change. So getting to that first point of saying, okay, we fixed the fundamental issues will vary by organization. And actually, the larger the organization and the more complicated the current infrastructure, organizational structure is, the longer it's going to take from that point of view. But we are normally talking something that tells kind of 12, 18-month process. On average, across the organizations we're working with, things will be in that kind of 12 to 18 months region. But it does vary across every organization, so there's no fixed answer.
Cool. And how should we get buy-in from senior management? What's the best way to do so?
I think that the key thing is making management understand that the way the target audience is buying our products or services has fundamentally changed. Now, if you're an organization that doesn't sell products or services, so maybe you want somebody to change their mind about something, and that's the whole point of the organization. It's the same principle. So very often what we'll do is say, okay, if we haven't got management buy-in, we need to speak to our customers, and we need to prove that the way they're going about their research or their actual buying process has changed, and therefore demonstrate the way that we're doing things and the way that our target audience are wanting to do things has fundamentally shifted. And if we bring it back to that kind of customer focus, that journey makes the difference. That might allow your senior people to come on the journey with you. It might be that you need a bit of shock and awe. So it might be actually one thing we have done, we've brought in some external speakers to just say, if you don't do this, you will fail. Now, you might find a gentler approach is necessary, and that might be an education process, which is basically some training for the senior leadership in some of these digital topics so that they understand it more thoroughly as well, and they'll feel more able to get behind those things as well. So generally, it is an educational process, and depending on the leadership will depend on the approach that we take to that.
Okay, we've got a question come through. What are the top main challenges to digital transformation in a business, and is it more cultural?
It is a cultural issue. I mean, we've kind of looked at those 10 key areas that are the problem areas. But the reason we called the book Building Digital Culture was that, yes, there are IT challenges, but it's really having that culture of ongoing learning, ongoing change, ongoing iteration, and not just using data for reporting, but for using it to inform what we do next. And there's a real culture in a lot of organizations at the moment in having kind of monthly reviews where we hold up a chart, show a chart going upwards, go, oh, great, that's good. But actually we should be looking at the data and saying, what's that telling us? And actually, what should we be doing differently? Whether that's in our marketing, our IT, our technology, or in our HR policies, wherever they may be. So it is that culture of iteration that we need to build.
We've got another interesting question come through. How do you see the impact of digital transformation on traditional offline channels? Is there any best practice to combine both online and offline views to track a customer journey?
Yeah, it's a good question. When we talk about marketing, for example, we keep talking about digital marketing, but actually it's just marketing, and it's the same with comms and everything else. So the reality is that very often the user journey will be both online and offline. whether that is seeing a print ad or phoning a call center or interacting in a store. And we do need to take account those things. Now, what I would say is that the measurement framework that I showed very briefly, you can include online and offline channels in there. And then by using dashboards, we're able to see the connection between those things. Because what more often not we're now seeing is that you will, for example, see a print ad or a TV ad and you go and do a search in Google. So we need to be able to draw those two connections. And it may be actually that somebody sees something online and then they walk into a store, and we want to make those connections. Now, actually, things like apps can actually be really useful. If you can persuade someone to install an app and then I can track you into my store, for example, that can make a massive difference. So we definitely need to take into account both the online and offline touch points, and actually the infrastructure, the IT piece is really at the heart of that, so that we can join up those different data sources and really start to understand how they interact with each other. But creating dashboards that include both elements can be really important.
Thank you, Daniel. We've got another one come through. Please feel free to keep your questions coming through. Are there any validated measures of customer engagement, and how to prove their financial?
Yeah, so this kind of comes back to the point I was making about vanity metrics. So for a long time, we talked about things like likes. So you might have a like or a follower on social media. Then we said, well, it's not about that. It's about engagement. But actually, just because someone clicks on a like button or leaves you a comment doesn't mean they're actually going to do the thing that you want them to do. Doesn't mean they're going to walk into your store, doesn't mean they're going to buy your product or service, doesn't mean they're going to pick up the phone. So we need those measurement frameworks and dashboards that allow us to see things like volumes, like likes, engagement, but then also seeing, did that then go on to contribute? And there are reports in things like Google Analytics. So when we were looking at a particular report, which is something called multi-channel funnels, it allows me to see, has that engagement actually led to conversion? Has it played a role? And we can start seeing how all the different channels actually interact. So what I'd always say is that if we are driving people through to a website, for example, we can then measure where they came from, what they did, and then I want to connect that out to my end business goals. And again, those measurement frameworks are really at the heart of that, and creating a dashboard allows me to see, did the engagement actually lead to someone doing the thing I wanted them to do? Now, quite often there's a gap, because I might be engaging online. So say I'm engaging with some content in LinkedIn, and then 3 weeks later I pick up the phone and I order your product or service. We can join those things up by sample surveying our audiences and understanding how their media consumption impacted what they actually did. But if we don't have the measurement framework set up in the first place, we just won't even be aware of that. So it is perfectly possible to validate it, but there is some process that needs to be put in place to do that.
How does the organization change the challenges of digital transformation by individuals who have jobs and may lose those jobs because of this digital shift? For example, because of their incompetence or use of information technology. What is the best solution to face these challenges?
So there's a couple of things wrapped up in this. First of all is the kind of skills piece. When we talk about incompetence and lack of knowledge about IT and technology, we need to be benchmarking our workforce at the moment, and we need educational training programs in place to improve those skills. And there needs to be a culture of ongoing learning. It must be that the individual takes responsibility for their ongoing learning, but the organization needs to provide the frameworks, the ability to benchmark ourselves, and the resources for training. So there's that kind of skills piece in there as well. There's also the piece about, when we talk about people losing their jobs, there is a kind of a challenge here. So for example, if we look at driverless cars, what happens when all those people that are driving cars no longer have jobs? And when we look at things like the Amazon Go store, where you walk in, you pick up products, you walk out, and there are no tills. What does that mean for all those people that currently work on tills in supermarkets and so on? And actually, this is a much broader issue with society, in that we need to consider, as roles are automated or digitized, what happens to those things. And my belief is that education is at the heart of this, so that we are cross-training, up-training people, and giving them roles that are required. And that means we need to be facing this head on. And part of our digital transformation process is to benchmark skills, look at roles, understand the HR implementations and implications of this as well. So this is why digital transformation is about IT and marketing and HR and every other aspect of the business as well, because it's impacting everything.
Great. Thank you so much. Those are all the questions we've had in. Thank you to everybody, including Daniel, for taking the time to help us pull together this webinar. Any questions, our contact details are up there and the slides will be emailed to everybody on the call. Enjoy the rest of your day. Thank you and goodbye.